Alright, so my last video detailed on 3 ways or 3 things that black men have to do before leaving this country. And somebody, interestingly enough, asked the question about, okay, so let's say we leave this country. Where can we go where we are appreciated, accepted, and embraced? And that's a fair question. And quite frankly, the answer to that is simple. Almost anywhere. Literally almost anywhere else. And I know a lot of you are going to come up with examples of, well, they got the neo-Nazis in Russia going after black men, and you see videos from Loser Y in China, him bitching about how Chinese racist against black. Look, listen here. A lot of those examples that you all may pull up in this video, I can easily counter them. And quite frankly, it's not about where you go, but what you do in order to prepare to go somewhere else. A lot of people who are watching this video, a lot of people who, particularly black men, tend to have this mind state or mindset that let's be honest, being a Negro, there's nothing wrong with it. Being a mediocre Negro, and I'll probably do a video on what a mediocre Negro is. Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. People just should accept you for who you are, and fuck the haters, and if they hate new races and all this other stuff. Look, as far as having that mind state, that is the worst thing you can do when stepping out of the United States boundaries. Now, yeah, you have America accepting and embracing that stuff, because quite frankly, that's what America wants from you. That's what America expects, and that's what America desires from black men, is to be mediocre at best. But when you go outside the country, there's a different expectation. And that different expectation is that you operate in the same mental capacity and mind state as everybody else. No ifs, ands, or buts. So the first thing that, as far as improving yourself to get out of the country, or as far as where you can go to get out of the country, it isn't about where you can go. It's about your mind state and what you take with it. And yeah, this could be considered a part 2 on what black men need to do before leaving the country, but here's this. Quite frankly, get rid of the Negro mind state. Get rid of the mind state that everybody hates you, that white supremacy is worldwide, it's running rampant, and that you're considered the bottom of the barrel. There are parts of America even which blacks, mainly because of the lack of population, and the blacks who do move to certain locations tend to have an objective mission or a mind state that helps them survive. Basically, the blacks in certain parts of the country, particularly even where I'm right now, we're not considered the bottom of the barrel. We're not considered the quote-unquote niggers of that society. And that's especially true once you leave the United States of America. You have to realize that, for starters, a lot of countries do not have history when it comes to blacks. Now, there are some countries that have been brainwashed and convinced by American media, not Western, not white, American media, that black men are scum of the earth. And quite frankly, I haven't seen anything since the 1960s from most black men that has countered that. So, in a way, a lot of you all have yourselves to blame. And a lot of you all with the coming on camera going, "It's your boy, man, no, I mean, you hurt," or all this other, these Negro colloquialisms, that isn't disproving anything. In fact, it's reinforcing a bad stereotype that should have been dead. And a lot of people who say, "Oh, why you talk whitewash? You have to stick up your..." Well, this isn't talking white, it's talking properly. And quite frankly, that's what the world is going to expect from you, especially coming from a first world country like the United States. So get with the program or stay in your hood. That's the only thing I can really tell you when it comes to preparing to leave, or actually leaving outside the United States. But as far as specific locations and where to go, it's simple. There are places in which, yeah, you have a lot of animosity, or what seems to be a lot of animosity towards blacks. But in reality, it's just animosity towards people who aren't of that country. So for example, in Poland, where Duke Jackson is, there are a lot of people, or a lot of Polish people, who are very xenophobic. And by xenophobic, they mean they're basically adverse to anyone and anything that resembles any sort of culture that is non-Polish. Now, there's a difference between xenophobic and ethnophobic. Xenophobic has a very nationalist tint to it. It means whatever this country represents, this is what we want to uphold, whether it's the people, the food, the culture, whatever. Xenophobic means basically you're in opposition to anything that is outside that country. Now, ethnophobic, which quite frankly what the United States has been for the longest time, and quite frankly outside a few decades in the 20th century, the latter 20th century, still remains to be, is anything outside that particular ethnic group. Mainly what we would call racism. So, for you guys in the UK, UKIP could be considered as xenophobic. They're anti-EU, anti-immigration of anyone outside the EU, but they will defend anyone and everyone who is of British descent, even minorities, so-called visible minorities of British descent, even Africans, especially since the Brits don't have beef with African Americans, which, hey, it's one country you can go to. Compare that to the BNP, the British National Party, which is a very fringe, very far right, very just racist, ethnophobic party. In America, for instance, you have libertarians, like your people who probably voted for Ron Paul. They'll be considered more or less, you can throw them sort of in the xenophobic category. They don't want a lot to do with the outside world, very non-interventionist. Versus Donald Trump, you can argue he's an ethnophobe to a certain degree, particularly when it comes to dealing with Latinos and Middle Easterners. But for that example, as far as countries on where black men, and these are black men who have done all the steps I've stated in this video and the last. Black men who are prepared to lead the country. It's quite simple. I think, well, not quite simple, but you have options. Obviously, you can. Canada would probably be the easiest place to transition to because it's quite frankly the United States of America without the anti-black racist history. So almost anywhere in Canada could suit you. Other places in the Anglosphere, such as the UK, Australia, New Zealand, great places. And then those places aren't known for being very welcoming towards Muslims, especially in the UK and in Europe in general. But you being a non-Muslim, you'll be fine. You will be considered a non-threat, quite frankly. And same thing with Australia. I heard they have a bit of an issue with the Pacific Islanders, the Aboriginals. People want to say Aborigines, or they're black too. Look, if an Aboriginal came to the United States, they would not be considered black. They'd be considered more or less Pacific Islander or something along the lines of that. So, take advantage on where you're not hated. But as far as other countries are concerned, all these other countries, the best way to be accepted in these societies is to learn the language. No ifs, ands, or buts. Yes, English is probably the #2 language in the country for 90% of the places I'm about to list. But it goes without saying that if you want to have the best success and the best experience in those countries, learn the native language. So, down the list, you got places in Europe, obviously, damn, they're all Western Europe, like France, Germany, the Netherlands, Ireland, good places. Obviously, you have Scandinavia, you have the exotic factor of black men, so like any of those 4 countries would do. To Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, unless you have some business, there's nothing much to see there. They're still recovering from the Cold War. Southern Europe, yeah, they do have some issues, especially Spain and Italy, but if you do some research, you should be fine. You have the Middle East, which, quite frankly, outside of Turkey and the UAE, I'd wait till things settle down. Just wait till things settle down just a bit. Needless to say, there's Africa for a lot of you all who are actually about keeping it black and having to worry about the least amount of racism. But still, it's like it doesn't come without its own challenges and nuances. Yeah, there's some blacks or Africans who may be pissed off that you all dropped the ball here in the United States, given that you've had so many resources, and they'll have a issue with you. But there are some places in which you'll be treated and greeted with open arms and told, "Welcome home, brother," all this other kind of stuff, until they want your money. But to Latin America, as I said, learning the language is the number one thing you can do. And for some of the countries that I'd recommend, I'd say Mexico isn't as bad as people say it is. Yes, Mexican Americans here may not like blacks, but a lot of that is a very Americanized programming bullshit. But if you actually go down to Mexico and conduct yourself like you're not a nigga, you will be fine. Some other places, I would say the other best bet would be Brazil. It's a good place, but remember, you don't learn Spanish because they don't speak Spanish in most of Brazil. They speak Portuguese. So remember that. And do not go down there being some sex tourist simp. That's probably the number one thing you want to do as a black man. It's sort of like the whites the white guys who go to East and Southeast Asia thinking they're just gonna get their dicks sucked once they step off the plane. That's not gonna happen for you. You're gonna have to put in work unless you want to run into some sort of trick, or unless you want to be a trick, I should say. As I said, other parts of South America, give or take, do your research. From the women I've dated, I would recommend Colombia, Peru, Panama, and Ecuador. That's it. I wouldn't say ease, but the experience of women I've had with Latin women dating in the United States is equivalent to there. I'd say those countries, you can go wrong with any of those countries, but it depends. I'd stay out of Central America, not because of the racial element, but because of the same reasons I'd stay out of the Middle East. It's very shaky, especially places like El Salvador and the like. Now, on to the East. Now, if you're really adventurous, I'd say check out places like the Stans, with the exception of Afghanistan and Pakistan. I wouldn't touch those areas. But Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, if you want to be really adventurous, I wouldn't go there immediately looking for any sort of lays. Probably just go there as a tourist, check out how the culture is, and then just learn it from there. South Asia, India and Sri Lanka and Nepal, Bangladesh. Honestly, India is a very tricky country. I wouldn't mess with the rest of those countries because a lot of them are borderline third world. And a lot of them do have a lot of racial issues when it comes to a caste system. But if you can conduct yourself well, learn some Hindi, they do speak English there too, you'll be alright. Maybe not as successful as white men, but quite frankly, I mean, it's a colonized society, it's a colonized country that's still dealing with neocolonialism to the point at which they think they're white. For some reason, they'll try to convince you that they're white. So just note that there'll be some issues when going to India. The food's good. I'd say as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, it's not bad. I'd stay out of places. I'd probably stay out of Indonesia only because it's a very conservative country when it comes to dating. It's the one country where in South Asia where Islam has a big influence. So yeah, unless you want to deal with that, then that's fine. I mean, you can't go wrong if you're what was it? Thailand, your Philippines, Vietnam is a very underrated place, especially for black men. I don't know. I don't get it with Vietnamese chicks digging black men. I don't know where that comes from. That's just been my experience. But that seems to be like the one East Asian country, or transitional East Southeast Asian country, who that doesn't have as much racial hangups, which transitions me down to East Asia, I should say, where China, the People's Republic of China, and the Republic of China. There are two different Chinas. Quite frankly, now if you're my complexion, and quite frankly, if you're my, I know people say colorism shouldn't matter. Well, in a way, it does. And back to the Latin America example, if you're a person of my complexion, all you really need to do is learn Spanish and you're good, or Portuguese. But here, I'd say the lighter you are, the better. So for dark-skinned dudes, you may be confused with being African, and the Africans, for the most part, have made the same reputation there, and East Asia has the African Americans have done here. Good job. So you will have issues, especially in places like China and Korea, the People's Republic of China and Korea. To a lesser extent, Taiwan, which is the Republic of China, and Japan, you won't have as much issues. As a matter of fact, if you're a person of my complexion or even darker complexion in those two countries, those are probably the easiest countries in Asia to deal with. Yeah, you'll have some quirks and some ignorance, but it won't come from a place of hate. In fact, Japan is actually known for being like the one country that tends to like Westerners equally, black or white, the most. Versus like places like Korea and the People's Republic, yeah, they're still stuck on stupid when it comes to race. And quite frankly, this is the reason why I state that black men, you need to improve your image abroad, or here, before you go abroad. Because what you do here gets leaked out like that, especially if it's negative. And you know how much the media doesn't like showing positive images of black men. And even though men who have had positive images, we see what happens to them. I won't mention any particular names or celebrities, but that's the rundown of places on where black men can go, at least from my experience and my research, that you will face the least amount of racism. Now, if you want to stay in these places permanently, I would recommend other channels, your Philcos, your Loser Laois in China, and the list goes on. I recommend those men for further evaluation and further questions, specifically if you're dealing with those kind of countries. But this is why I state, for black men, yes, the United States, at least in the long term, does not look good unless some big revolution, and I mean like a mental and cultural revolution occurs in which you get your heads out of your asses, stop acting like niggas, and get with the times. I'm not trying to be cynical, but quite frankly, I think a lot of black men have been pandered to the point in which it's like, oh, it's okay if you're poor and white supremacy. No. The Jews didn't take that. The Jews didn't sit on being tortured historically, and look where they are now. There's no reason why blacks, particularly black men, can't do the exact same thing, and even more. So, hope this helps. For everyone else out there, always bet on X.